What if solving a mystery only made things more terrifying? History is full of secrets, but some are so dark, so twisted, that once uncovered, they leave behind more questions than answers. From ghostly lights beneath frozen lakes to a man who remembered his own execution, these aren't legends. They're real events, with real evidence. And by the end, you might wish they had stayed buried. These are 5 historical horror mysteries you'll wish stayed unsolved. The Whispering Crypt of Blackstone Abbey. In the mist-shrouded hills of Yorkshire lies the overgrown ruin of what was once Blackstone Abbey, a 14th-century monastery with a reputation so dark, even locals avoid speaking its name. For centuries, it has been the subject of fearful tales, accounts of strange chanting in the dead of night, murmurs that seemed to seep from the crypt itself. The legend claimed that the monks who once resided within had been cursed for heretical rituals and now whispered prayers in eternal torment from their graves. The first recorded account dates back to 1612, when a shepherd named Thomas Elbridge reported hearing ghostly voices as he passed near the ruins at dusk. His tale was met with ridicule, until others began hearing the same thing. Pilgrims, soldiers, even a local priest all spoke of a chilling choir rising from beneath the broken stones. By the late 1700s, the abbey had earned its sinister nickname, the Whispering Crypt. Over the centuries, attempts to investigate the site were met with resistance from both townsfolk and the church, which deemed the place spiritually toxic. A string of mental breakdowns among those who dared explore the crypt only cemented the site's grim reputation. In 1844, Lord Henley Fairfax, a well-respected historian, entered the crypt with 2 assistants and emerged 3 hours later, alone. Pale, shaking, and unable to speak, he lived the rest of his life in silence, committed to a sanitarium until his death in 1851. No one returned to the site until 1978, when a young and determined archaeologist named Dr. Evelyn Harrow petitioned the British Heritage Council to grant her permission to study the ruins. With advancements in non-invasive scanning technology and a team of skeptics and scientists, she set out to either confirm or debunk the centuries-old legend. The first few days yielded nothing but structural data and fragmented artifacts. The abbey had clearly collapsed from natural erosion and neglect. But on the 5th night, during a routine equipment check just after sundown, one of the interns, Jordan Lee, ran screaming from the crypt's entrance. He claimed to have heard a single drawn-out whisper directly in his ear, though no one was nearby. Then the recordings began. Audio devices placed around the crypt picked up soft, rhythmic whispers between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. every night. The voices, when played back, sounded like Latin prayers, but slightly distorted, as if spoken from underwater or through stone. Strangely, none of the whispers were audible in real time. Only through playback. Intrigued, Dr. Harrow focused her team's efforts underground. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a network of chambers and passageways beneath the abbey, including a perfectly circular room 30 feet below the old chapel, an apparent echo chamber, completely sealed off. When they finally broke through, what they discovered defied expectation. The room was lined with smooth stone, and at its center stood a circular dais. Along the curved walls were holes, tiny ones, each connecting to narrow stone tubes that traveled upward toward the surface. The architecture was remarkable, a medieval acoustic chamber engineered to amplify sound from below to the surface above. Dr. Harrow hypothesized that the monks had designed the chamber to simulate divine voices. By chanting from the lower dais, their voices would filter up through the tubes and emerge from the crypt above, soft, disembodied, and chilling. The whispers were no curse. They were an elaborate form of religious theater, likely meant to awe or manipulate congregants. But that didn't explain why the voices continued to occur, centuries after the monks had vanished. Further study revealed a collapsed aquifer running just beneath the chamber. Seasonal flows of water passed through the hollow tubes, mimicking the pressure and vibration of human speech. Combined with mineral buildup and shifting stone, the natural sounds created patterns almost identical to human voices. In essence, nature was now playing the monks' final chant on a loop, like a broken record echoing through time. Just as the mystery seemed solved, something changed. On the final night of their expedition, a microphone left deep in the chamber picked up a whisper unlike the others. Slower. More deliberate. Translated, it read, "You have heard us. Now we hear you." The voice did not match any known Latin phrasing. More disturbingly, it came from a section of the chamber completely sealed off by rock and untouched by water flow. Dr. Harrow's team was unnerved. Audio experts confirmed the frequency and tone were unlike the natural echoes previously recorded. There was no explanation. The team packed up and left the site within 48 hours. The project was quietly archived. To this day, the whisper is a topic of debate. Some believe it was a final fluke of acoustics. Others suspect a hoax among the interns. But a third theory, quietly passed among sound engineers and archaeologists, suggests something older lies beneath the Abbey. Something listening. Something that, after all these centuries, finally spoke back. The skeleton clock of Tagora Island. In the sapphire blue of the Mediterranean Sea lies Tagora Island, barely a dot on the map. A rocky, uninhabited place with no known history, no ruins, and no reason to attract attention. That changed in 1992 when an earthquake exposed a previously hidden cave system along its northern cliffs. Inside was a bizarre, bone-white structure resembling a clock, built entirely from bleached skeletons, animal and human alike. Locals dubbed it the skeleton clock. The artifact stood nearly 10 feet tall, with ribs, spines, and femurs arranged into rotating wheels and pendulums. But it wasn't just art. The central gear, constructed from a human pelvis, ticked once every full moon, with eerie precision. No electronics. No wires. No apparent power source. It confounded everyone. The discovery caught the attention of Dr. Felix Grunwald, a Swiss horologist renowned for deconstructing ancient timekeeping devices. Alongside a team of archaeologists, Grunwald descended into the cave system in late 1993. What they found only deepened the mystery. The walls were covered in faded runes and early Latin phrases, some referencing the hunger below and the mouth of time. The structure itself was embedded into a stone platform, with gears connected to a shaft leading deep into the earth. Initial dating of the bones placed them between 1,800 and 2,200 years old. More baffling, the bones came from at least 40 distinct individuals. Some bore signs of surgical drilling and precision cuts far too advanced for the time period. The central tick that occurred once per lunar cycle was mechanical, measured with astonishing accuracy down to the second. 4 months, the team documented the clock's mechanics, trying to understand how it operated without modern machinery. Finally, in 1994, an answer came, one more unsettling than anyone expected. Beneath the skeleton clock was a shaft descending nearly 50 feet. At the base was a chamber filled with stagnant water, saturated with thick layers of phosphorescent moss and decayed organic material. Dr. Grunwald realized the tide's movement into the cavern, triggered by gravitational lunar pull, was causing a buildup of pressure in a submerged tunnel. This pressure funneled through bone flutes acting as hydraulic pistons. Once per lunar cycle, enough force built up to push a bone lever, which triggered a gear, causing the entire structure to tick. In other words, it was a tidal clock, a primitive yet genius device using nature's rhythms. Grunwald declared it the most grotesque but brilliant early engineering artifact in history. But the question remained, who built it, and why? Then the human teeth were discovered. Hidden within the gears, stuffed into small pouches behind the wall, were over 100 human teeth. All from adults. Some showed markings from metal pliers or crude extraction tools. A larger pouch, located behind the pendulum, contained a parchment scroll. Translated, the scroll revealed the structure's name, Chrono Mortis, the time of death. The scroll spoke of a cult in the waning days of the Roman Republic. This sect, believing in a great sea-born deity called Virex Mortuari, offered time itself as sacrifice. They believed that death could be measured, and, if kept on schedule, could grant favor from the being beneath the sea. The skeleton clock was both altar and timepiece. Every full moon, one soul would be sacrificed, their bones added to the clock, their time literally given. More chilling was the clock's final inscription, etched into the cave wall behind the pendulum. When the clock ceases, the mouth opens. This warning terrified the team. They hadn't considered what might happen if the mechanism failed. Grunwald insisted they preserve the clock in place, without disrupting the tidal chamber below. But funding grew scarce. In 1997, a private collector offered to fund the removal of the clock for museum display. Against Grunwald's advice, extraction began. On the night of the clock's removal, during a full moon, the ticking stopped. For the first time in likely 2,000 years, Chronomortis went silent. 3 days later, seismic activity beneath Tagora Island increased. Divers sent to monitor the site reported strange underwater caverns releasing bubbles and thick silt, clouding the sea. One diver, Matteo Rossi, never returned. His tether snapped. When he was found hours later, his body showed signs of massive pressure trauma, but no water in the lungs. His jaw was shattered, and his molars were missing. Local fishermen began avoiding the area, claiming the water pulled at their boats as if alive. Whispers of curses resurfaced. By 2003, the island was declared restricted for conservation reasons. No further studies were conducted. The skeleton clock remains in a private collection in Luxembourg, but it no longer ticks. Grunwald, who published only fragments of his findings, died mysteriously in 2005 after reportedly trying to reconstruct the lower chamber in his home lab. The room caught fire under unexplained circumstances. What is known is this: the clock's timing was perfect, its power purely natural. But its intent may have been far more than ritual. Some believe it wasn't measuring time, it was containing something. A tide. A hunger. And when the tick stopped, the count ended. No one has dared rebuild it. The screaming paintings of Madame Vaillant. In the heart of 19th-century Paris, nestled between opium dens and candlelit cafés, lived an elusive and eccentric painter known only as Madame Vaillant. She never allowed anyone to see her face, always veiled, and rarely ventured outside her manor, save for late-night trips to cemeteries and butchers. Her art, however, spoke volumes. Dark, emotional, and horrifying canvases filled with distorted figures and silent screams. What set them apart wasn't just their haunting appearance, but the chilling rumor that surrounded them. The paintings screamed. According to numerous accounts, owners of Vaillant's paintings, often wealthy aristocrats or bohemian collectors, reported hearing cries, moans, and wails coming from the canvases in the dead of night. Some claimed the screams would get louder during storms or when left in dark rooms. Several of these owners suffered from sleep paralysis, hallucinations, and eventually, mental breakdowns. One even took his own life, slashing the painting before leaping from a balcony. By 1872, only 5 of her works remained in circulation. The rest had either vanished or been destroyed by frightened owners. Madame Vaillant herself disappeared shortly after an arson fire consumed her home. Her body was never found. For decades, her legacy was whispered about in art circles like an urban legend, until one of her paintings resurfaced in 1995, hidden in a private estate near Lyon. The painting, titled La Follette au Murmure, The Whispering Girl, was discovered behind a false wall during renovations. Within days of the painting being moved into the main house, strange occurrences began. The family dog refused to enter the room, the housekeeper quit abruptly, and the owners reported the unmistakable sound of a child screaming around midnight. But only in the room with the painting. And only when the lights were off. Rather than destroy the piece, the owners reached out to the Muséum d'Histoire Inexpliquée, a small institution specializing in anomalous historical artifacts. Dr. Helene Martel, an art historian and acoustics specialist, was assigned to the case. What she discovered shook even the most skeptical minds in the field. Upon close inspection, Dr. Martel found that the painting had unusual texture, not in the brushwork, but the canvas itself. Using high-resolution X-rays and infrared imaging, she discovered a second layer beneath the visible painting, made from what appeared to be animal hide. More specifically, goat skin. The kind used in primitive drums. Further scans revealed that beneath that, another material had been embedded, thin reeds and bone pipes designed to resonate with heat. Vaillant's painting, it turned out, was not just a canvas. It was a sound-producing device. The combination of animal hide, stretched tightly across hollowed panels with embedded microreeds, could create high-pitched tones when air and temperature shifted, such as the warm air of a fireplace meeting the cold walls of a stone house. In effect, the painting screamed when heated, like a macabre symphony of suffering built into its very structure. It would have been a brilliant, if grotesque, artistic experiment. Except for one final discovery. Tucked between the frame and the canvas was a bundle of red silk. Inside were two items, a small, rusted scalpel and a note written in blood-red ink, reading, "The voice belongs to her. She was never silent." Further investigation into Madame Vaillant's personal life uncovered disturbing clues. She had lost a child at birth, a daughter, still unnamed, whom she was rumored to have kept in her home for weeks after death. Neighbors reported foul smells and hearing lullabies late into the night. One butcher claimed she bought strange cuts of meat every 3 days, with precise weight requirements, just enough for a child, he had once said, uneasily. The real horror began when tissue samples were taken from a torn corner of the canvas. DNA testing, difficult due to age and contamination, revealed that the hide used beneath the goatskin may have been human. Specifically, from a young female child. And not just any child, one who shared mitochondrial DNA with the remains found in a small, shallow grave near the ruins of Vaillant's former estate. It became clear that Madame Vaillant had not only preserved her child in memory but had used her remains, bones, skin, possibly even vocal cords, to create the foundation of her most haunting work. A masterpiece powered by death and obsession. The scream wasn't just mechanical. It was personal, real. Only 3 other paintings by Vaillant were ever found. Each one showed signs of similar construction, and all had acoustic properties that triggered under heat, pressure, or darkness. One was dismantled and burned. Another remains in vault storage, sealed behind lead-lined walls. The third disappeared in 2001 under mysterious circumstances, last owned by a collector who later vanished, leaving behind nothing but bloodstains and broken glass. Experts today remain divided. Some argue the screams are nothing more than old mechanisms reacting to environment changes. Others insist the voices vary too much, different tones, pitches, even words spoken in whispered French. Dr. Martel, once skeptical, resigned from public work in 2003. She has never spoken about her final tests on La Follette au Murmure, except for a brief, recorded interview in which she says, "If it's art, then it is the most honest expression of grief I've ever witnessed. And if it's something else, then I pray she never finishes the last verse." To this day, Madame Vaillant's remaining works are listed as dangerous artifacts by select international agencies. None are on public display. And those who have stood before them swear that when the room is silent, when all else is still, you can hear someone breathing. Not crying. Not screaming. Breathing. The lights beneath Lake Malmorra. Tucked between snow-covered peaks in a remote corner of Scandinavia lies Lake Malmorra, a pristine, glacial lake shrouded in mist and local superstition. For centuries, villagers spoke in hushed tones of the wandering lights beneath its frozen surface, glowing orbs that drifted silently beneath the ice, sometimes following people, sometimes watching. They weren't stars reflected from above, nor lanterns. They were described as pale blue, almost ghostly, and they shimmered even during overcast nights. Locals believed the lights were spirits of those who had drowned there, restless souls trapped under glass. Historical records going back to the early 1600s mention a sudden spike in mysterious drownings and disappearances around the lake. Entire fishing parties vanished, their boats found adrift with not a soul aboard. Survivors, few and far between, claimed they saw lights beneath the surface that called to them. They spoke of hearing their own names whispered from under the ice. The lake soon earned a grim reputation. No one fished it. No one swam in it. And by the late 1700s, the nearby village of Norholt was all but abandoned. Only a few stubborn families remained, living in superstition-fueled isolation. That changed in 2011, when a Swedish research expedition arrived to study the glacial patterns and sediment layers of the region. Among the team was Dr. Ingrid Kellström, a marine geologist who had grown up hearing tales of Malmorra from her grandmother. The lights had always intrigued her. She dismissed them as ice refraction phenomena or methane bubbles distorted by folklore. Now, she had the chance to prove it. The research team set up camp on the lake's northern edge and drilled several boreholes through the ice. Using underwater drones equipped with infrared and low-light cameras, they began scanning the lake bed. For 3 nights, all data appeared normal. Cold. Deep. Silent. On the 4th night, the drones picked up something. A series of soft glows began to pulse in the black water, perfectly round orbs that moved in synchronized patterns. Not gas. Not static reflections. They responded to movement, even light from the drones. One orb approached the drone and hovered just inches away from its lens. Then, as quickly as it came, it darted downward into the depths, out of range. Dr. Kellstrom and her team were stunned. The lights weren't illusions, they were real phenomena. But what were they? The answer came after one of the drones got tangled in a submerged structure and had to be manually retrieved. Divers went into the water the next day and made a shocking discovery. Deep below the surface were the remains of ancient wooden ships, at least 7 of them, arranged in a radial pattern, almost ritualistic. Within these ships were human remains, seated and dressed in Viking-era armor and garments. This shouldn't have been possible. The age of the remains was estimated between 600 and 900 AD, centuries before Viking settlements were recorded in this region. Stranger still, each boat was filled with a glowing moss, soft, gelatinous material emitting a faint bioluminescent light. Samples brought to the surface confirmed that the moss was a genetically altered strain of a now extinct Nordic algae, combined with whale oil and preserved in resin. Someone, long ago, had engineered a way to create sustainable underwater light. But why? Carbon dating and structural analysis led to a chilling theory. These weren't burial boats. They were containment vessels. Each ship held not just bones, but chains, ropes, and what appeared to be ceremonial spikes driven through the remains. These people hadn't been honored. They had been trapped. Etched into the inside hulls of each boat were carved runes. When translated, they spoke of the serpent beneath and the sky-lit curse. One phrase repeated over and over: "Let not the sky touch the sea, lest he stir." Dr. Kellstrom theorized that the glowing moss was not merely a light source but a warning system, a visual barrier between the surface and whatever lay below. The lights, always seen from the ice above, weren't random. They were the last flickers of ancient containment technology. And now, after centuries of silence, they were fading. Over the next 2 weeks, drone footage showed fewer and fewer lights. The moss was dying. Lab samples revealed rapid cellular decay in response to temperature changes, likely accelerated by recent climate shifts. As the moss dimmed, more seismic activity was detected beneath the lake. Tremors. Rumbles. The research team reported strange electrical interference. One member, technician Lars Holm, claimed he heard whispering through his radio headset, an indecipherable, guttural language. He was later found unconscious by the lake's edge, with frostbite and a single word carved into his palm: "Awake." The Swedish government quickly stepped in, citing environmental preservation. The expedition was halted. All data was classified. The team was dispersed and made to sign non-disclosure agreements. But rumors persisted. In a private interview before her disappearance in 2014, Dr. Kellstrom described her final dive into Lake Malmorra. She said she saw one of the lights up close, larger than before, brighter, hovering over a fissure in the lake bed. Within the fissure, she said, something was moving. Not a fish. Not ice. Something that pulsed, breathed, coiled. She left the country soon after and was never seen again. Today, Lake Malmorra is closed to the public. Satellite images are scrubbed. The village of Norholt is officially uninhabited. But the locals who still live in the nearby hills speak of new lights, brighter now, slower, almost deliberate. They no longer drift passively beneath the ice. They rise. The man who remembered the wrong execution. In 1927, A quiet man named Emery Blackwell walked into the Texas State Penitentiary and requested to speak with the warden. He carried no identification, wore outdated clothes, and spoke with a distinct 19th-century Southern drawl. When asked for the reason of his visit, he calmly stated, "I believe I was hanged here, but I shouldn't have been." Thinking he was mentally unstable, prison staff began a basic background check. What they discovered unsettled them. Emery Blackwell had indeed been executed in 1887. His name, photo, and criminal records were in their archives. He was hanged for the murder of Judge Samuel Dobbins, a high-profile case that gripped the nation at the time. But this Emery, standing before them in full health, and now in his early 40s, was identical to the man in the 1887 photograph. Even more disturbing, his fingerprints matched those in the prison's century-old ink records. Psychiatrists were brought in. Emery explained in detail what he remembered. He had been arrested, wrongfully accused, and sentenced in a sham trial. He described the gallows in precise detail, down to the chipped paint on the wood and the crooked nail where the hangman hung his cap. He said he remembered the moment the trapdoor dropped, and then, nothing. Until he awoke on a dirt road in the year 1925, with no money, no memory of where he'd been for nearly 4 decades. His story made headlines. Reporters dubbed him the man who returned from the noose. But while most dismissed him as a hoax or delusional actor, one investigative journalist, Clara Linton, saw something in his eyes: truth. Clara dug into the 1887 trial records and quickly found discrepancies. Emery was convicted based on a single eyewitness who claimed to have seen him fleeing the judge's home. But that witness, William Covell, was later implicated in another case of perjury. Judge Dobbins had enemies, and Emery had no known motive. Yet no appeal was ever filed. It was rushed, finalized, and Emery was hanged just 3 weeks after the verdict. Clara's digging hit a wall until she received an anonymous letter. Inside were 2 pages from a torn journal, dated 1887 and signed by the prison chaplain at the time, Father Wallace Griggs. The entries described doubts about Emery's guilt and hinted at corruption involving several state officials. But most chillingly, the last line read, "The boy don't deserve this. I've sent word to a man who says he can help, though I fear his methods." He spoke of unraveling time. Unraveling time? This led Clara into stranger territory. She began researching Father Griggs and found he had once been associated with a fringe group known as the Arclight Circle, a secretive collective of pre-modern scientists, mystics, and philosophers who believed that time wasn't linear but reactive. That traumatic injustice, when powerful enough, could recoil time, creating ruptures or loops. In their theory, a moment of wrongful death could burn a scar into time's fabric, and in rare cases, correct itself. Not by undoing history, but by resurrecting the wronged at a later point in time. Clara believed that Emery was one such anomaly, a living correction, pulled back into the timeline by forces neither natural nor understood. But not everyone wanted this truth revealed. Shortly after Clara published her preliminary findings, the newspaper's offices were raided. She was fired, her work confiscated. Emery disappeared from the halfway house he was staying in. 4 months, no one could locate either of them. Then, in 1929, Clara reappeared, pale, shaken, and deeply paranoid. She gave one final interview to a small underground magazine in New Orleans, in which she said only, "He remembers more now. But it's not just his life. It's others too. Lives that never happened. Executions that shouldn't have. He dreams of the gallows. Dozens of them." She claimed Emery began having visions, people being hanged, electrocuted, even executed by firing squad, men and women whose names he didn't recognize. In these dreams, he wasn't watching, he was inside them. Each time, he said he could feel the noose, smell the burning fuse, or hear the rifle fire. But he always woke up gasping, alive. Clara concluded that Emery wasn't a singular miracle. He was a receptacle, a vessel for time's unresolved errors. For every person wrongfully executed, some fragment of their last breath echoed through him, as if time had chosen him to carry the weight of injustice. and then, she vanished for good. The only remaining trace was a cassette tape mailed anonymously to the same magazine editor months later. It was just under 2 minutes long. On it, Emery's voice is heard reciting names, some with full details, others just whispered. The tape ends with the sound of creaking wood, like a rope swinging from a beam, followed by a faint but unmistakable sound, a heartbeat, then silence. To this day, no rational explanation has ever been offered. Skeptics dismiss it all as a complex hoax. But believers point out that several of the names Emery spoke on the tape were later proven, through DNA and exonerations, to be wrongfully executed individuals. And those names were not known to the public in 1927. There is no grave for Emery Blackwell. His final whereabouts remain unknown. But every so often, a new story emerges, someone far too young, or too distant from a crime, suddenly recalling an execution that never happened to them. A noose. A drop. A voice whispering, "This wasn't meant to be." Perhaps time doesn't forget. Perhaps it remembers, through those who were never supposed to die. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?